once you learn this stuff, you can't unsee it. You can't unknow it. You suddenly see weasel words everywhere. You suddenly see measures that aren't really quantitative everywhere. So it naturally becomes a way of thinking. It's not something you have to carry around with you as an extra thinking load.
Welcome to the GovComms podcast, bringing you the latest insights and innovations from experts and thought leaders around the globe in government communication. Now, here is your host, David Pembroke.
Hello everyone, and welcome once again to GovComms, a podcast about the practice of communication in government and the public sector. My name is David Pembroke. Thanks for joining me. As we begin today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which we are broadcasting from today, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to all First Nations people from the lands where our listeners are joining us from today. Now, you might cast your mind back to episode 55 that took place in COVID many years ago. Well, my guest then was Stacey Barr, and she's back after a longish break, and looking forward to this conversation today. Stacey is a globally recognised specialist in organisational performance, measurement and evidence-based leadership, working extensively with governments and public sector organisations around the world. You might remember, well you probably don't, but you may remember that Stacey created the mnemonic PUMP, P-U-M-P, to signify a method and practical approach to performance measurement that she authored. She is also the author of Practical Performance Measurement and Prove It, and her content has appeared in the Harvard Business Review's website and also in the acclaimed Manage Mentor program. She joins me on the line. Stacey, welcome back to GovComms.
Thanks so much, David, for having me back.
So, it's been a while. How have things changed in the organisational performance measurement space in the last 6 years? Because it seems, as ever, to still be elusive, particularly in the practice and application of communication.
I think it's become more elusive. I think, you know, that time back in 2020 that we all know changed many things about the way we all work. And I think a couple of factors really did change the performance measurement evidence-based strategy landscape that I work in. One is just the need to be able to do so much more virtually and online. That meant we had to change a lot of how we work. I mean, back in our first interview, David, you were asking about how we go about measuring performance, and I think one of the first things we talked about was how it's a team-based approach. We really need to get people together to do this. And of course, in 2020, that wasn't always possible. But we did learn how to collaborate online so much more. And now it's so much easier for teams to get together, particularly cross-functional teams that work in very different locations. So that level of collaboration and the style of collaboration is quite different in this space. But another thing that's changed, and I think this might be more of the reason for the elusiveness, is that the demand for accountability, especially in the government space, has never been higher. But I think the appetite for real measurement has never been lower. And I think maybe leaders are feeling a little threatened maybe in the current environment for this, you know, more transparency, more public accountability. And it's a natural instinctive thing to move away from measurement because we traditionally don't do it very well in our organisations, even to this day. And unfortunately, it's the very thing that I think is going to help them with this new tension is the genuine measurement of impact in a way that helps them learn faster and get more control. But it's a step change in thinking. It's a shift, a lot of mindset shifts to do measurement really well. and all the pressures going on in the world these days decrease the amount of time we have for doing it. I think attention spans have become shorter because there is so much more to try and process. I mean, just look at the way AI is changing the landscape and the way people approach learning, the way they approach getting things done. And things just need to happen quicker and more things need to happen. So something like measurement, where it really does require us to stop, pause, think differently, get really clear about the results that matter and how we're going to evidence them. We just don't seem to have the time and the energy for it.
But that's interesting, isn't it? Because here in Australia, the federal government has set up the Australia Centre for Evaluation inside the Department of Treasury. And I'm just reading from its mission statement here that it says, we seek to improve the volume, quality and use of evaluation evidence to support better policy and programs that improve the lives of Australians. And if you go through it, there's an evaluation toolkit, there's a library, there's all sorts of resources. But this avoidance piece, why is it that even though we have access to all the tools to evaluate, that we still don't pick it up, and that leadership perhaps doesn't enforce evaluation more rigorously, given that it is a stated priority of the government?
Two things in my experience, I think, David. I think one is that the tools that are widely and commonly available, and I'm not going to pinpoint any specific ones because I think this is a broadly found problem, is that most of the methods that we have, not just in Australia, okay, I mean all around the world, there are resources in government to guide the better use of evaluation and measurement. But there's missing pieces in those approaches that mean that when those approaches are used, they either don't feel natural, they aren't giving the meaningful measures and evidence that leaders are expecting, and they're not ending up with much better than what they've had. Those missing pieces have to get plugged before they're really going to get that genuine, meaningful measurement. And the other thing is, if you do happen to land on genuinely meaningful measurement, it's showing you truth. And leaders might be ready for the truth. Leaders might be sitting there saying, look, I know I need to know this. And when I do, I can make better decisions, have more control and influence over how my department, organisation, agency is working. But when I think it's generally the public might not be ready for that level of truth because they don't want to tolerate things being any less than how they should be, and therefore they're not going to, I think, give leaders the space and the time to think through how to make their organisations' processes better and more capable of delivering the community outcomes that they're there to do. So it creates this feeling of immediate threat, which I think gets in the way of leaders really wanting to invest the time to get measures that are going to tell them where things just aren't good enough, the very things they need to know about.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's reinforced by the performative nature of forums like, in Australia again, things like Senate estimates, where it's just a gotcha exercise, from the beginning to the end, as senators seek to create a moment that they can then clip, put up on their social media, and look like that they've landed a shot on the government somewhere, somehow. So, leaving aside the depressing context, what are, in your experience, some of those missing pieces that undermine the tools or the use of the tools to provide better measurement and evidence?
One of the missing pieces is the very first step that precedes good measurement. And most people would say that the first step is to say, well, okay, what do we measure? But it's a question we really ask too soon. And in fact, if we follow the right approach, we don't ever need to ask that question. The good measures come out of a good thinking process. The very first step that's missing is, what impact are we trying to have? Now, in government, there is a tendency, I'm not sure if you've noticed it, David, but to be action-oriented. A lot of the strategies, a lot of the so-called KPIs or metrics really point at what action we're doing, what activity we're doing, what stuff we're completing. And that is not impact. That's not evidence of impact. So starting with that question, what results are we trying to make better, is missing from most of the approaches that like they would, if it is included in the approach, it's usually fairly thin, like list your goals or list your objectives. It's not that simple. Part of articulating the results that we really want is choosing words that make it really clear to everybody what the result means. There's a phrase that I think it's quite old now, maybe it's even outdated, called weasel words. Have you come across that, David?
Yeah. No, I used to be a journalist, and used to often read statements, media releases, comment pieces, which, plenty of words, but not much meaning.
That's it. And most government strategy is written like that. Look, if we were cynical, and I don't think we need to be, if we were cynical, a lot of that is used deliberately to try and avoid pinning anything down, because of that context we talked about before, about kind of the threat and the gotcha game that gets played. But if leaders really want to improve the way their organisations serve the communities that they're designed to serve, they have to be able to articulate their strategic goals, the things that really matter, in language that not only the whole organisation can understand, but even the leadership team can have a shared understanding of. I have worked with leadership teams before with a set of strategic goals they've had in government, and once we started talking about what they really want, and usually I'll come in, in the role of, I don't understand these, educate me, help me understand what your vision is, help me understand what shifts and changes you're trying to make, what's strategically important for you. And in the act of them explaining that to me, we realised they didn't even share the same understanding of it. This is the problem with weasel words. So clearly articulated results is so important before we come anywhere near that question of what should we be measuring.
Perhaps if you could take us through a step-by-step process that follows that pump methodology that you've developed, and indeed, has that changed in the last 6 years, or are the underlying principles the same?
It is. It's pretty much like it, because I created it so long ago, like in the late 90s, it evolved a fair bit through its first 10 or so years, out there field testing it, I guess. Yeah. Probably around 2015, 2016, we kind of hit, this is where it works, and we haven't had a reason to change anything about it since then. So yeah, it's been a very stable methodology that's proven itself for at least the last 10 years, the way it currently is. So no, the steps have not really changed. So it's still about, let's start with the goals. Let's first make sure that they are articulated as results and not actions or activities or projects to be completed. The projects and activities matter though, David. I don't want to kind of just throw them off to the side and ignore them. The struggle that we have is mixing all of these things up, and action, initiatives, milestones, all of those things matter, but they only matter after we're clear about what we want them to achieve for us, what we want them to change or shift or improve. So the result language is where we always start. Generally, when we articulate or re-articulate a goal as a result, that's when the weasel words can creep back in if they're not already in there. And so each weasel word gets not challenged, but queried, I guess. What do we mean when we say diversity? What do we mean really in our context at this point in time for our organisation and what we know we're good at and not so good at? What's this result around diversity that really matters for us? Or we're wanting to be more transparent. What does that really mean? What's transparency really mean for us? What does efficiency, effectiveness, quality, sustainability, all of those good things, what do they actually mean for us right now in our current strategic context? And so those weasel words then get reworded into language, phrases that makes it crystal clear to everybody what the priorities really are. I'm not sure if you've come across this. It's kind of, I don't know if it's an exact quote. I guess I'm paraphrasing Michael Porter from many, many, many years ago, being the strategy guru that he was, maybe still is. The key to strategy is omission. So when we de-weasel something, in a way, we often have to decide what we're leaving out. So with the diversity example, diversity has so many different dimensions to it. It's not just gender or race or able-bodiedness, or there are so many different dimensions to diversity. We've got to decide what we're leaving out because it really isn't a priority for us right now, and what we're going to focus on improving. That's a hard step to do. I think governments are often under pressure to do so many things for so many different stakeholders. So being ruthless about their prioritisation can be a real sticking point. And what that can often mean, doing those two things to our goals, turning them into results and making sure they're de-weaseled, is that we can either end up with more goals than we actually realised we had because we just smushed them together into succinct phrases, or we can sometimes discover that parts of our goals are actually not that strategic at all. They're either belong at an operational level in the organisation, or they are not right for now, and though we can put them on the back burner and feed them into the next planning cycle. So generally that's a conversation, and it can be a little bit iterative. The first time a leadership team has that conversation, it can feel a few different things. It can feel clunky because I haven't thought that way before. It can take a little bit more time than they were expecting. And they can also say things like, oh, we've never been this clear before. We should have had this conversation years ago. So it's quite a profound experience the first time. But because it's skills-based, because it's based on a technique, you just practice it. You do it. Every strategic goal you tackle, the better you get at it. When you ultimately, and this is my hope, is that leaders get to a point where they never have to use this technique because the goals they articulate start out good. They start out result-oriented and clear from the get-go. It's not, there's no rework needed anymore. But that's getting the goals to a point where everyone understands them, we know their priorities, and we're ready to then start thinking about measuring them.
Okay. So just before we jump onto that, the tool of the 5 whys is obviously, well established, where you have a conversation about diversity, and obviously why is that important? You give an answer, and why is that important? And then at the end of the 5 whys, would you expect that you would be close to where you should be in terms of language? Is that the way that you get to that clarity, by continuing to examine a particular proposition that you may have started with?
To get an action-oriented goal written as a result, why is absolutely the question. Why are we doing this activity? Why is it important that we do this audit? Why is it important that we redesign our comms process? Why is it important? Sometimes one why is all that's needed, but if that why lands to something that still sounds a bit like an action or just doesn't sound like it's nailing it, you need the second why. To be honest, David, with this, I haven't found we've needed all 5 whys, but why is the key question there. When we come to de-weaseling a result, the question isn't so much why. The question now is, what does that mean? How could we say this in a way that a 10-year-old could understand? So it's a different line of questioning to translate those weasel words from things that are ambiguous, vague, have different meanings to different people, and to turn them into a phrase that is much more accurate, pinpoints what we really meant in the first place, and that when 7 different people read it, there's still only one shared understanding of what it is. Yeah.
So with that, and I've been reading for my sins a number of strategic plans lately for a number of different reasons. And I often have the thought that, sometimes you read it and it's like, okay, this could be for any organisation. These particular priorities or objectives or goals, they're not actually specific to the operating context and priority of a particular organisation, but they're flabby and they're just general and other. Is that a common problem that you find, that things could be transferred and you just take out the words of X organisation and put in Y organisation, and it sort of all could be the same thing?
100%. I love your word flabby.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's so true. If you read out the vision, mission, and strategic goals of an organisation without knowing who the organisation is, and you've still got no clue what the organisation does, yeah, we've got a problem, and that is very common. But I think it could be caused by a couple of things. It could be just the safe way to go. Let's just be intentionally broad and intentionally vague, so we give ourselves lots of wiggle room, or so we don't lock ourselves into something that likely will need to change the very next month. But another reason, and I think this is probably the more common reason, is we just don't know that it's important to be that specific and that tailored in the words that we choose to describe what our organisation's about and what is strategically important for it. It's a discipline that I don't think is ever taught. I mean, the number of people that I've spoken to over the years that have taught in business schools and have said they've never had to teach anything like that, about how to be clear and specific and result-oriented in the way they write goals. And even people who've been through business school will say, "Oh, I never learned that. No, I never, what are you talking about?" It's like we come back to what we started talking about. This is one of the missing pieces. It is so endemically missing from what leaders know about strategy.
Yeah. So when you talk about specificity, you say, let's talk about, let's say, a university. And are you saying that we really need to get to the point of we need to increase enrolments of students in undergraduate degrees by 15% by 2030? Is that smart objective or smart goal that you're requiring people to get to? So is it, one, they can't get off the hook because it's there, or are you looking as in another sense?
There's a few things in what you've just said that are probably worth putting a little spotlight on. The first thing is the way you phrased that objective. The result was described, the measure was described, the target was described, and the target date was described, all part of that. That is highly specific. To me, that is, let's just go back a step. Terminology is a big problem in our space. Doesn't matter which consultant you talk to, which expert with a framework you speak to. Words like objective, goal, outcome, KPI, performance measure, performance indicator, metric, target, there are just so many different definitions for all of those sorts of terms. But let's pull apart the piece that you just described about the enrolments. You had the result described, you had a way to measure it described, you had a quantitative value that you would ultimately want that measure to move to, and you had a date by which you wanted to have that measure be at that new level. And they are the essential pieces, but they don't necessarily have to be put together in a single statement that we might call an objective. They can just sit in a lot of the strategic plan layouts that we see in government, but they just need to be clearly and specifically done. So there could be a result column or the strategic goal column where those goals are written as results. Then there would be a measure column where the KPI or the metric, whatever you call it, goes. But that's really saying the number of enrolments of undergraduate students. So you're actually saying what you're quantifying. To figure out what the target should be for that is kind of probably another tangent we could go on, but we'd need to understand where that is now. Like, what's our baseline of what that level of enrolments currently is? why aren't we happy with it? Why are we wanting to improve it? And how much effort are we willing to put into improving it? And therefore, what level do we think we could bring it up to or should bring it up to? And that would be our target value. How much time are we going to need to make the changes necessary to do that? Well, it's not going to be 3 months' time. It's probably a year or two to really significantly shift enrolments. So let's give ourselves a reasonable timeline to do it. But that's really how any strategic plan should be laid out. The one thing missing from what you'd said, and you probably hadn't intended to say it anyway, but I'll add it. What are we going to do to close that gap between the baseline and the target, the performance gap, if you like? So what are the initiatives, the actions, the things we're going to change, the effort we're going to invest in to make that actually shift? And there you have the basic bones of any good strategic plan, any plan at all.
Just quickly, before we move on to sort of the stages as we start to sort of peel out, the idea of, what does evidence and what does measurement look like? But what's your distinction between an objective and a goal?
I don't really have one because I don't tend to use the word objective. I tend to use words that I think are fairly generically understood. So goal is generally the word that I would use. And to me, a goal is a qualitative description of the result that you're trying to achieve or improve. Don't even think about how you're quantifying it yet. It just needs to be a qualitative description of what you're trying to achieve. Objective is a tricky one. I try to stay away from it, particularly given the growing popularity of OKRs, objectives and key results, because the definition of an objective there just adds another layer of complexity. So, objectives, I don't know. I think what's far more important is understanding what these different bones are that matter and deciding in your organisation what labels you're going to give to them, building a glossary, and encouraging everyone in your organisation to stick with that. Now, some of that languaging or that terminology can be not so much imposed, but it can be guided by regulatory bodies or more cross-government type organisations that are kind of supporting performance management. But that glossary, that deciding how you're going to name those bones in your organisation is far more important than knowing I don't have the correct answer. I don't have the correct definition. I have a definition of what a performance measure is, but in my mind, a performance measure and a metric and a KPI and a performance indicator are all just names for exactly the same thing.
Why don't you like OKRs? What have you got against OKRs?
Oh, I don't have anything against. Tomorrow I'm speaking at the OKR Institute's World Summit. So I've got no problem with them. It's just an example of another framework that has its own terminology. And let's use OKRs as an example. The way they are written varies so greatly depending on who's doing them. Some people will write objectives as goals, the way we've kind of been discussing, like a qualitative statement of the result that we're trying to improve. But others will write the objectives as a project, a thing we are going to complete. And then the key results get written as milestones, or we will have finished this by this date, or we will have done 12 of these, rather than the performance measures that they really could and in my opinion should be, and others, there are plenty of people that write key results as actual performance measures, so that an OKR becomes a well-expressed result we're trying to improve, plus the 2, 3 or 4 quantitative measures that we're going to use to help us manage our way toward achieving that objective and have evidence that of when we have achieved that objective. So nothing wrong with OKRs, but just like any framework, without those pieces that we're talking about that are missing, it's too easy to trivialise them and use them ineffectively, I guess, miss out on their power.
So just staying on that for a moment, and if we just go back to that objective or goal that I stated before around increasing the number of enrolments of undergraduates
in a particular university by a particular date.
Yeah.
What might be some of the performance measures that you would then attach to a goal like that?
Firstly, we would think about what's the evidence of that, the evidence of the goal. Now, the goal that you've articulated is actually very specific and concrete, so the measure just falls out of it.
Yeah.
You would be counting the number of enrolments that are coming from into undergraduate programs for the university. You'd need to make a decision about how frequently we measure that. When do enrolments typically come in? Do they come in on a quarterly basis? Can people enroll and start a program, halfway through the year or at the end of each quarter? So we've got to think of a cadence of measurement that's appropriate for that. That one's fairly straightforward to measure. We don't have to ask the question, so how do we measure that? Because we look at it and we immediately know what the evidence of that would be, and then we just quantify that evidence.
And is that where you need to get to in terms of, as you say, having that very concrete starting point then helps you with performance measures to keep them to maybe 2, maybe 3, perhaps 4. Is that the gold standard? Is that what you're looking for?
My gold standard for the number of measures that we would have for any one goal is probably 2, maybe 3. Very often 1 is enough when the goal is so specific, like the enrolments goal that you shared, David. But some goals are a little bit more complex than that and might need a few different measures that complement each other, and those kinds of measures tend not to fall immediately out of just reading the goal out and going, oh yeah, obviously it's these 3 measures. They need an extra step, and this is another one of the missing pieces actually from a lot of the frameworks for strategic performance management that are out there, including OKRs. There's no methodology for how to do this, but how to get from a goal that's not quite as specific as the enrolments goal to a set of direct evidence quantitative measures for it. We need that missing step, which is what would convince us that, what would we see, what would be something we could observe in the real world that would convince us this goal was happening. And that list of evidence, again, is just words. It's just describing things we would see, things we would hear, things we would be able to touch or observe in some way. Those pieces of evidence then become the starting points for what the measures would be. And how do we get from the evidence to the measures? Well, we ask the question, how could we quantify that? So can you think of a goal, David, that's a little bit more complex than enrolments? Is anything on your mind?
Well, no, but not immediately, but let's say, it's an issue around reputation.
Reputation, beautiful.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Okay, so let's say it's a university's reputation. And this is actually a good one, because the more that a university can work on its reputation, the more that's going to help them achieve that enrolment target.
Yes.
So there's a cause-effect relationship there. So reputation, however, tends to be a little bit weaselly. It can mean a lot of different things to different people.
Yeah.
So reputation might mean, if we had that conversation, and jump in, correct me, change it if you want, but reputation could be is that potential students, maybe it's around the world, maybe that it's not just in Australia, maybe it could be, attracting international students as well. Our reputation could mean that around the world, potential students believe they will get a better education with us than with their local choices or something like that. So and it could mean something completely different, but we've got to be that specific. So then we would ask the question, well, what's evidence of that? What's evidence that potential students around the world think they would get a better education with us? How would we see that happening? One thing could be is that we get a lot of inquiries from potential students, maybe when they're still in high school or when they're still, in the middle of their previous degree, but they're wanting to get a postgraduate degree or something with us. We're getting inquiries. We're getting a lot of hits on certain pages on our website that are coming from maybe other countries. Other evidence might be that we're getting actually a lot of applications from other, but these are things we think about. I'm not doing a very good job of it because I don't work at a university and I'm not thinking like a university's leadership team. But that's the kind of thing we're looking for. Once we can understand what that evidence is, now we can decide what we're counting.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then, as we seek to assemble that evidence, what are the next steps of the process as we sort of move our way through to maturing that framework that we're then going to hold ourselves accountable to? And perhaps the second question in this is, how much time should people be spending in the evaluation measurement space? Because it would seem that as you're trying to gather either qualitative measures or quantitative measures, it could take a lot of time. But then, just as I asked the question, then I think about artificial intelligence and how it may be able to be configured in a way that does a lot of that analysis and acquisition of understanding automatically on my behalf, because I've been able to, program it in a way to do a lot of that work for me.
Okay. So there's a few parts to this question. I think before we go to what is the next step naturally in this measurement process, I think AI can actually help us with the parts that we've already spoken about, but we have to guide it really, really well. Yeah. We can't say, I've got a goal about our university's reputation. How do I measure that? That's going to be because AI doesn't reason. It is an incredibly fast and powerful pattern recognition tool, and go and find whatever's out there. It will bring that together and try to draw some kind of pattern and meaning out of it. What's out there on a university's reputation may not be very reliable. It may not have decent fodder to gather. So it's going to bring the best of a bad bunch. We have to direct it more specifically. So it would be, we're interested in improving our reputation so that we can attract more students. So we want to understand more about this dimension of reputation and what it can mean to us. We've had a conversation, and this is the way we're defining the important parts of reputation. Then a question for AI would be, and therefore, what do you think we would notice in the real world if our reputation was improving? What would there be more of? What would there be less of? What would we see? What would we hear? Who would we hear or see these things from? Give us a list of possibilities. And what AI does then is it thinks very quickly about a whole range of possibilities that we can then look at and go, okay, no, that's not relevant to us. No, that's not going to be, this one we hadn't thought of. This could be really powerful. Yeah. So it's helping us gather broader ideas and think more broadly than we probably would have, so that we've got better choices, but we still have to make those choices.
So just running through that sort of, the earlier part of that question about the process. And as I say, once we've sort of established that we've gathered the evidence of more of, less of, what we see, what we hear, but also that question remains around how much time should people be thinking that they need to dedicate as part of their work? Or is it not a matter of time? Is it just a matter of workflow that should be a constant companion that sits with you on your, as you go through your work? So is it the acquisition of evidence and the understanding of measurement is part of every action that you're taking?
I think you're absolutely right. It is. And that's ultimately where we want it to be. If we turn up to work thinking that we're going to do a great job, we're going to exercise our responsibility in the roles that we have without having any evidence of whether what we're doing is working or getting better or not good enough or whatever, then that's not the kind of world I would want to live in. No. So I think it does have to be part of our thinking, and it naturally does become part of our thinking. One of the bits of feedback I get most often from our Pump alumni around the world is that once you learn this stuff, you can't unsee it. You can't unknow it. You suddenly see weasel words everywhere. You suddenly see measures that aren't really quantitative everywhere. So it naturally becomes a way of thinking. It's not something you have to carry around with you as an extra thinking load.
Yeah.
How you get to that point, though, David, this comes back to the time that's required. That is a relevant point. It is. I think it's very right of you to raise that, because this takes learning. This doesn't come naturally. It's it's like the leadership team trying to make their goals result oriented and de-weaseled. The first time anyone does this, it doesn't feel natural. They've got to practice it a few times, and so it will take longer. The first measure design that somebody does is going to take an hour and a half. And they're going to say, oh, we can't do this for every single measure. And the answer is you're not going to have to. That hour and a half you've just invested, you've now laid down a new thinking pattern in your brain. Let's do a couple more just to bed that in and practice it, get it locked in. And so the next one might take an hour, and the third one might take an hour. But now, now it's feeling more natural. And then it's half an hour, 20 minutes, 15 minutes. So the actual getting to the point of knowing what the measures need to be gets very quick with a little practice in just a single planning cycle. The next planning cycle, it just becomes, just natural. And that's the case for every step in this kind of process. You think about, like, one of the natural next steps is we've got to define these measures in enough detail that we can get the data for them and routinely get that data reported in a way that we can look at the measure and interpret it and use it. Setting that up has a bit of a learning curve too. It's not as simple as going out and buying a dashboard app and saying, I want to start measuring these things. We've got to be very clear about how we want to measure these things. What is the best place to get the data from? And rules about how that measure gets calculated, so that every time we look at that measure in every monthly meeting that we have about performance, we know we're looking at the same thing and we can trust it. And the signals that we're seeing, we can trust them. So setting that up takes a learning curve. But again, once it's set up, from that point forward in the next planning cycle, we're just kind of tweaking and fine-tuning and shifting and adjusting a little bit. We're not starting from ground zero and having to put all that work into it. It's like you say, all of this different way of thinking in an evidence-based way starts just becoming the way we think.
So what then are the steps that conclude the thinking process once we've defined our measures in detail, we've got the data, we've established the uniformity so as that we understand that what we're looking at is the same thing? What is left that people need to learn in order to be effective around measurement and evaluation?
Because that's a big question. I mean, it takes us nearly 3 days to teach all of this. So what I will do is focus on the next 3 missing pieces that you just don't see in other methodologies, because these are a sequence and they kind of line up with what's left to do. So one of the next things left to do is to report our measures in a way that we see real signals. So one of the things that's missing from most organisations' approach is how to decide what a real signal is. We're so used to seeing traffic lights, red, amber, green, that kind of tell us, should we look at this KPI or shouldn't we? Is it on track? Isn't it? Most of the rules that decide what gets red and what gets green are not statistically valid, and they end up driving us to react to things that aren't even there, to waste our time and energy chasing a problem that doesn't exist. And to miss the opportunity to fix things before they become problems. So the missing piece here is how to look at a KPI in the right kind of visualization that stops us from being distracted by just normal up and down variation that's always going to be there for every KPI, and instead look at where that pattern of variation is changing in a significant way that tells us something actually has shifted. We actually did get this thing to improve, or this thing is getting worse. Oh my God, we really ought to be dealing with this quickly before it really becomes a big problem. So just for listeners, because again, this is going to take a little bit of learning, but in Pump we use XMR charts to display our KPIs, because that is the only way to get those true signals. XMR is a type of chart out of a statistical body of knowledge that's over a century old and has proven itself time and again. We don't need to prove the value of the charts. What we need to do is see how they're valuable in KPIs and strategic performance management. Once we've got that, it means we're able to look at a KPI and decide what kind of action's needed. That has a a consequence for how we report and how we structure our performance review conversations, whether they're monthly or weekly or quarterly or whatever. Those conversations where we say, are we on track? Are we keeping to strategy? Are we achieving things that matter? And the implications that kind of chart has for those meetings is mostly in the report design, but report design really can become the agenda for a meeting. And that should be based around 3 questions. I think most performance dashboards are pretty and they've got lots of stuff, and but generally the findings are that most people don't find them insightful. Anyone still using paper-based reports, they tend to be very more reporting on action and activity rather than actually results. But a true performance report should answer 3 questions. What is performance doing? Hence the chart that we use. Why is it doing that? Which is some analytics and a little bit of cause analysis to get some insight into what are the levers that we could be pulling to change it. And that leads us to the 3rd question. What are we going to do differently? Is there an initiative that we've invested in that just isn't cutting it, that just isn't making the impact we want, so we have to go change that? Or is something changing where we don't actually have any kind of initiative or response for it, and we have to come up with some kind of action that's going to deal with it? So that is the next missing piece, which is structuring our reports and our performance review conversations around those 3 questions. Mm-hmm. And then the third missing piece that I mentioned is making sure that we always have our initiatives and actions and projects and change programs, whatever, tied to the KPI that they're supposed to be shifting. We don't want to have our monitoring of progress split into monitoring our activities and then monitoring our results. They have to be tied together. And in a way, I guess that means bookending any kind of initiative with a KPI. We design the initiative because it's going to close a performance gap in a KPI. And once we implement that initiative, we're going to use that KPI to tell us, is the initiative achieving that or not? And was it successful or wasn't it?
Ignorance of me, but an XMR chart. Take me through that. What is that?
Wow, that's hard to take you through without a visual, because it is a really powerful visual chart.
Okay, I have to go and have a look.
I can give you some links if you want to add anything to the show notes.
Yeah,
on this.
great idea.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. So really, as you say, it's the pump methodology really is something you can learn, and obviously you've been teaching it for some time. Do you have any anecdotes of, great successes that people have had through the acquisition of this particular skill that has had a material impact on the performance of their organisation, be it public sector or other?
Yeah, absolutely. A director from the State Library of South Australia, for example, she started using Pump a few years ago, and one of the biggest impacts that she said, one of the critical things that she said had been missing from all of their previous approaches was the ability to tell the story of outcomes and impact with evidence. So she's naturally an outcome-oriented thinker. What she lacked was the evidence. So they had been tracking activity, but not value. And so they rebuilt their performance framework. So they have a performance framework, a way of thinking about all of this. They rebuilt it around results, not activity. And it was really about, the value that libraries create for their communities. And what they ended up with was something that had enough credibility that they could use it with government funders and local councils to actually win extra funding for some of the things that they were trying to do. It was a convincing story they could share, an evidence-based story that they could share that made others feel very confident to invest. And I mean, there's a whole case study around this on our pump.academy website. So that's one example from public sector. There's probably on a more again, public sector kind of, but not in Australia. This is in the United States, the Federal Aviation Administration. This is quite a few years ago, but it's a nice example of, the the libraries one is starting at the strategic level, but this team started at a very operational level, had a very specific goal around reducing the cost of people who wanted to become flight controllers, the direct air traffic control people that failed that exam and could not end up being in that role, but were sitting around for months and months and months in facilities doing nothing, being paid until they could find a new position for those people to go into. They wanted to reduce the cost of that. They wanted to reduce the stress that it had on the people that did fail the exam and were waiting for to have a real job. So they set a goal, they found a way to measure it, they analysed it, they came up with a solution to which actually turned out being getting rid of constant checks with management on whether they could proceed to the next step. So they managed to reduce all of that, which took out a lot of time. I think they took the average time that people were in facilities from something like 67 days down to 21 days. They exceeded the target that manager had given them because they took a deliberate approach. They thought about the result and what it really meant. They measured it directly and in a way that they could monitor and inform their actions. They used it to test whether their actions were right, and they could come back with the proof that it had worked. It saved them in the first year $500,000.
Wow.
And that's an ongoing saving, isn't it? Because they don't have a problem they have to carry into the future.
So just on a personal note, like as someone who's made this your career, and sort of circling back to the first part of the interview, really around this sort of avoidance of evaluation, measurement, and really it's about effective evaluation and measurement and gathering of evidence. What gives you hope that things are going to change, particularly in government and the public sector, given that the world has sort of turned upside down and, everything seems more chaotic by the moment and unsolvable in so many ways and chaotic?
I think that's a really good question, David. What comes to my mind first about what I think gives me hope is the idea that there are leaders out there that we could call breakthrough seekers. They are leaders who really want to make a change. That's the important thing to them. And they are desperate to find a way to do that, particularly given the constraints that they have to work with in today's world.
Yeah.
And finding those breakthrough seekers, those who really want to make a difference, are really open to learning, want to make things better, are seeking excellence, I think they are the ones that Pump's going to help the most, because Pump is going to give them the missing pieces. It's going to give them the roadmap. It is a practical approach. It's step by step. We've roughly gone through it, but rest assured there are very specific steps that make every part of Pump very doable and learnable. And once they have that and they can see that roadmap working for them, they will make the changes they want. They will create the excellence that they're looking for, and they will become the inspiration to others who just need to see that someone has succeeded before them, that somebody has done something that keeps working, and then those leaders that are still caught in that kind of maybe threatening kind of space will see that hope as well.
Well, there we go. Let's end on an optimistic note. It's always nice to leave a conversation with hope, because I think the optimistic thing for me anyway is really that sense of there is a process, there is a path. Yes, there are all sorts of tools out there, but certainly in Pump, this is a stripped down, effective, proven approach. So what is the best way that people might be able to get in contact with you if they feel that this is something that they need in their organisation to be more effective?
I think if they've got that question about, is this something that I need? Is this something that can help me? One of the best things for leaders to do is to feel it And we can help them have that experience with some of the stuff we've talked about, David, applied to one of their own strategic goals we kind of nickname it a discovery discussion. So that's no obligation. It's not a sales meeting. It's no pressure. It's legitimately because we want leaders to feel this, because when they feel it, then they'll know if it's going to help them, if it's right for them. It's not just a matter of reading a web page. It's experiencing it applied to their own goal. So I would suggest anyone listening to this that really wants to play with this is reach out to us and ask us about a discovery discussion and how it works. And that's just info@pump.academy, and you'll reach us directly.
Fantastic. Well, listen, Stacey, thank you so much for giving up some of your very valuable time today to share it with the audience of government communicators, not only in Australia but around the world. And again, I do think it is something that in people's busy lives where everyone's being expected to do more with less, we have the impact of artificial intelligence and how that's changing the way people are working or thinking about working. Finding, as I say, an evidence-based proven methodology that can demonstrate the value and the impact, such as your client at the State Library of South Australia was able to do, to tell that story that then underpins, further bids for additional resources because of the outcomes that you'll be able to demonstrate through those stories and through that reporting. So, I would encourage people to be in contact with Stacey, and what can be lost in a discovery discussion, where I like that sense of feeling it. That aha moment of, okay, I get what you're talking about there. Yeah. And perhaps that feeling is reassurance and confidence that you can bring something to your organisations that will make them more effective. So, Stacey Barr, thank you so much for joining us again on GovComms. Let's not make it 6 years? Is it that last? About that, or maybe 5 years since you were on? But episode 55 in the library. And I don't like it with... this podcast was called something else before it was GovComms. Can't think of what it was off the top of my head. That was a long time ago. But anyway, hundreds of episodes now from communicators and specialists in skills relevant to communicators from around the world. And long may it continue that we have conversations with people like Stacey. Now, you can do me a favour by just jumping onto your podcast app, find the rating and review, and give us a rating or review. If the purpose of this conversation is really to get people like Stacey, who are genuine experts, to have these conversations so you can learn. 1, 2, 3, 4 things out of today. I've got a notebook of insights that I've taken from today's discussion that I'm going to take away and implement into my daily work, and I hope that you have done exactly the same thing. So please, a rating or review, that would be great. But a big thanks to Stacey for joining us today, and a big thanks to you for coming back once again, and we look forward to joining you in another fortnight's time. But until then, please be kind to each other. My name is David Pembroke, and it's bye for now.